Let's get straight to the IMF loan, and even before this massive amount of money is in the bank, the debate for and against has started. The International Monetary Fund approving South Africa's request for 70 billion rand in emergency financial support. But if you've been following this one, you'll know that the move has been criticised by some. Let's interrogate this a little further as I'm joined by two leading economists, Lumkile Monde from the University of the Witwatersrand here in Johannesburg and Nicoli Nattrass, Professor of Economics at the University of Cape Town. To both of you, thank you very much for joining us. Prof. Nattrass, to you first of all, did South Africa have any choice but to go to the IMF?
You know, it really did need to go to the IMF because we needed to protect our balance of payments. We need this particular special drawing right, as they call it, but also because the interest rates are relatively low for this grant, and it sends an important signal out to other financial institutions, and therefore South Africa is going to be able to, as they say, leverage, get other organizations, including the World Bank, to lend us more money, because we've got a huge shortfall because of our massive drop in tax revenues. So if we are going to do anything to kickstart the economy and finance the COVID response, we do need this grant.
Lumkile Monde, the IMF is going to publish a letter containing South Africa's commitment to repaying this loan later next week, or I beg your pardon, later this week. What do we know so far then about the conditions?
In terms of the rapid financing instrument, the conditions, Jeremy, only relate to macroeconomic, structural economic and financial reforms, which we expect, in fact, the minister had put them in November, and hopefully they'll be reiterated again in the October medium-term budget policy statement. And we all know that those don't have enough support across a broader section of civil society, as well as some business sector. So I think South Africa is going to be on high noon as struggles between those that are pro-reforms and those that are against go on each other's throats, and in that process ensuring that the IMF commitments are not stuck by South Africa. I think South Africa is not going to be able to successfully implement those reforms.
Professor Nattrass, it's a political football and a hot potato rolled into one. Many critics are saying the move like this has compromised our sovereignty. What does that mean, and do you agree?
Well, there's always this concern about that to get an IMF loan on such good terms, there's always these conditions, because the IMF wants us to be able to repay the money, and they've got a particular view, as Nicoli was saying, about, what sort of reforms we need to do to boost growth. But, if you look at the IMF comments on this, they seem to be focusing on things that Tito and others in the finance ministry want to do anyway, right, which is to consolidate and refocus our government expenditure. They want us to look more carefully at the state-owned enterprises. But there are a few other things, like, for example, the IMF says that the central bank needs to keep its inflation mandate. So the IMF is already signaling to us, don't move on your monetary policy either, because we think that won't help you grow, and then we won't get our money back. So there's already hints of a little bit of a stick in terms of what kind of reforms they want. But these are mostly reforms that I think South Africa wants to do anyway.
Lumkile Monde, I'm looking at what the money is going to be used for. Let me read it out to you. Support health and frontline services, protect the most vulnerable, drive job creation, unlock economic growth through reforms, stabilize public debt. That's a big list, and it's all very vague, isn't it?
It is vague because I think the Minister of Finance does not have his way in terms of instilling discipline, in terms of financial prudency, as well as discipline, as fiscal discipline. So in that regard, the instrument itself is a very blunt instrument if you're going to invest on health infrastructure, as well as training and skills formation of nurses and support staff to doctors, in the sense that for that to build hospital, you needed a long-term facility, which the World Bank could have availed it. I think, as Nicoli was saying, is to supporting the balance of payments, given the COVID pioneers who've imported massive health instrument from other countries, instead of that process being used to support new production facilities, given the research and development which universities such as the University of Joburg had developed cheaper ways of new ventilators, and that those facilities could be built faster and invest on productive capability than importing straight. So we see that money being used more to support the balance of payments due to the leakage that we're seeing on corruption in Gauteng and other provinces due to the imports that we've seen coming through for the health sector.
Lumkile Monde, though, is there ultimately going to be a bun fight here in terms of people queuing to put their case forward for priority?
I think the priority is already contestable, given already the COSATU-linked formations have cut ties with supporting the access to the IMF, and I see more of that happening in the next few weeks as resistance to the IMF package continues, and as the minister who has no political support at all struggles to implement those reforms, and therefore us being in an environment where we've got a loan, we've got no growth, the government in power has got no support of instilling discipline, and we slide towards what we've seen elsewhere, where there is contingent divisions, countries fail to meet obligations and default on their debt in the medium to long term. I think South Africa is facing that reality today.
Professor Nattrass, how can we monitor all of this? As one social media post said today, how can we monitor in terms of the fact that the money doesn't end up in Range Rover dealerships around the country?
Look, this is a huge problem, and this COVID crisis has really exposed how weak the state has actually been in controlling its money. But right now, with all of the global financial institutions watching us, I think that the government's going to be doing everything in its power to make sure that this particular grant is managed properly. That doesn't mean we're going to stop the corruption, but I'm really hoping that this is the wake-up call. This is what we have to do. If we can't get this right, we're in real trouble. You know, we've lost more than 300 billion rand in terms of lost tax revenue. This is this is about a quarter of making up for that. So we desperately need this money, and now's actually the crunch time. The government has to spend it properly and be seen to be spending it properly, or I agree with Lumkile, we're lost.
And to both of you, I thank you for joining us today. Lumkile Monde at Wits University and Nicoli Nattrass at the University of Cape Town.